Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Artful Chiropractor podcast. My name is Ray Daniels. This week, we are excited to bring to you Dr. Jan Kirschner, who was supposed to be on the podcast about a year ago, but we had some difficulty with the Skype interview and the connection, so it didn't quite work out, but I'm excited and grateful that he's willing to be back on the podcast and share with you a little bit more about his story, his journey. He's in his mid-60s and still going strong. That was something that I was so drawn to getting to talk with him, is that he's in his mid-60s and he's still sustaining his mind, body, and his passion for chiropractic and sharing the message with others. So a little bit more about Dr. Jan is that he has maintained a successful wellness chiropractic practice for 29 years. The quote-unquote rules he developed for success in chiropractic school have been passed on to students at numerous institutions for generations. Dr. Jan was a founding board member of the Association for Network Care and an international teaching staff member for the Wise World Seminars, during which time he developed the Page 1 seminar as a way for students and doctors to master fundamental skills that were beginning to disappear from chiropractic curricula. He has taught Page 1 and has recently created Page 2 seminars in Australia, Europe, Bali, and the United States. Prior to becoming a chiropractor, Dr. Jan Kirschner was a comedy writer and a performer, appearing in venues such as HBO, the Olympic Arts Festival in Los Angeles, and the Goodman Theater in Chicago. Dr. Kirschner is the proud father of 3 children, all of whom were born at home, adjusted within minutes of their births, and have solely utilized chiropractic care to lead healthy lives. So that's a little bit about Dr. Jan, and what we talk about throughout this interview are his story going from theater, comedy, travel, into chiropractic, and then into NSA, which is network spinal analysis. So that application, his journey throughout that entire process, which is really interesting, and then just creating an experience for people in his office, and then what he does in his Page 1 and Page 2 seminars, which are coming up in Paris later this month, and then in August in the Bay Area. So stay tuned for that. And if you dig what he has to say, definitely check out these seminars. I'm really interested, and I want to try and get to the one in the Bay Area come, I think, August 4th and 5th. So anyways, I hope you all enjoy this interview. So sit back and welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jan Kirschner. Dr. Jan Kirschner, welcome back to the Artful Chiropractor.
Well, I thought we did a great one last time, Ray, and unfortunately the technology didn't work so well.
I know our listeners are probably like, what do you mean, welcome back? We've never heard of this guy yet. But yeah, I was so bummed when we did that. It was such an awesome interview and good conversation. It was just jumbled up a little bit with, a little bit of bad connection at times, and it was funny. I was going back and listening to it, and I was like, wow, even though it was like jumbled up, like I think people still would have really gotten a lot of value from it.
Well, hopefully we can do something even better this time around.
I think so. Awesome. But yeah, thank you so much for making this connection happen again. I mean, it was about a year ago, but I'm so excited to chat with you, Dr. Jan. For our listeners who, don't know who you are just yet, I'd love to kind of jump into your story, which I find so fascinating, up until chiropractic.
Sure.
So I'd love to have you share a little bit about that.
So my career actually began in the theater. I was a drama major in college, did graduate work in theater, got a Master of Fine Arts degree in theater directing, and then almost all of my PhD, and started teaching theater, which was my original career. After a couple of years of teaching, I decided that the academic life wasn't really for me, and I actually turned down a really remarkable opportunity starting a directing program at a major university in order to go on the road directing a troupe of acrobat juggler clowns for $100 a week. And during the course of the time that I was working with these guys, we decided that I should probably start performing with them because I could actually speak better than them, and so I became kind of more of an MC figure, and I was also a juggler, so I started working in some of the juggling routines, and then also did some kind of parody comic juggling stuff to offset the kind of brilliant things that these guys were doing. And during that time, I was working on juggling 5 objects. And when you juggle 5 objects, you're looking up in the air a lot. And I actually hurt my neck during that time. And what happened was, with that particular group, we used to perform in colleges up and down the East Coast, and we would follow the fall and the spring. So we would in the summer be in Boston, and then as the fall would start, we'd start going south, just continuing along with the fall until we got all the way down to Florida, and then we would winter in Key West, and then in the spring start the journey back up again. And that was what was going on. So the guys I was working with had spent a number of winters in Key West, and they said, well, when we get down to Key West, we're going to take you to this chiropractor who's a great chiropractor, and he'll fix you right up. Well, it turned out that chiropractor had actually sold his practice to another chiropractor, and so I was taken to see her, as Dr. Debbie Flynn, who was a life graduate. And when I went to see Dr. Flynn, I was pretty blown away by her level of service. I'd really never experienced somebody in their professional life who seemed that dedicated to serving. And interestingly enough, I'd actually been taken to a chiropractor by my parents when I was a young teen, because I was having some problems with my neck at that time. And that doctor never explained anything to me about chiropractic, which was really interesting because I met him later on in life, and he was a really principled chiropractor, but he had never told me the chiropractic story. Anyway, Dr. Flynn really was dedicated to communicating the chiropractic story. And so I learned about it, and I was pretty fascinated by it. We had long discussions about whether I should go to chiropractic school. And I decided at the time not to, because I believed that what I was doing, which was making people laugh, the shows that I was doing were comic in nature, and that had its own healing properties. And I still believe that. Laughter is, I think, one of the greatest, as you will, healing techniques and healing properties we have. Mm-hmm. And so I kept performing, and I actually went to another group and performed with them for a number of years, and we were ascending the ladder of show business, and we did a HBO Young Comedy special that I actually got royalties for almost 30 years after we did it. I got to perform in the Olympic Arts Festival in Los Angeles, doing a production of The Comedy of Errors by Shakespeare. And when we were in Boston, which was where our group started out, I'd been interviewed by the editor of the Whole Life Times, and kind of talked to him about this idea of comedy as something that was healing, and how important I thought it was. And the show we were doing was, at the time, very rare in that it was not at all sexist, it was not at all homophobic, it was not at all racist. It was just funny, and without having to have that comedy come at the expense of somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so as we were moving up the ladder of show business, we wound up doing our show off Broadway in New York. And we were meeting kind of more and more challenging people, and just by chance, on the street one day in New York, I happened to run into this guy who had interviewed me for the Whole Life Times back in Boston. And we started talking, and as we were talking, I realized that it didn't have the same passion for me, that it had just kind of become a job for me. And I got kind of sad. And I went home that day, and I sat down, and I closed my eyes to meditate. I had started meditating a few months before. And I sat really quietly, and this very clear little voice came into my head and said, "It's time to be a chiropractor." And having never heard a little voice in my head with that clarity before, I realized, okay, That's what I'm meant to do. And I called my partners the next day and said, hey, guys, you need to find somebody else. I'm going to chiropractic school. And that was that.
Wow, that's a powerful story. A couple of things I want to circle back on, Dr. Jan. Having all these skill sets in theater and comedy, what are a few of them that you think really helped you perform in chiropractic and connect with people?
Well, I think the first place it actually starts is from teaching. So as one of the things I've always liked to do is to teach. And of course, the saying about teachers is that we teach the things that we most need to learn. And so one of the things in kind of educating my patients over the years, it's a constant reminder to me about what I believe in terms of healing, and a constant desire to continue to deepen my own belief system as to how healing takes place. The comedy piece, it keeps people at ease. I like to laugh. I like to have people laugh. I still, I kind of have a side gig where I will work as an auctioneer for nonprofits, raising money for things that I believe in. And a lot of that relies on kind of the MC skills that I developed doing comedy. And I've helped people raise hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. So it's really a matter of kind of communication, allowing people to not take themselves quite so seriously, and me not taking myself quite so seriously.
I think that's huge. We haven't talked about that too much on the podcast, but, being able to keep it light, when people are having, all these different, maybe potentially negative experiences that they're coming to you with, to be able to address them, but yet keep it light and try and not take yourself too serious at the same time. I think that's very crucial to sustaining your practice, and then you're just passionate, I think, for what you do.
I think that's true, and I think that it also allows people to open up at a different level where they don't have to kind of be in the suffering place so much, but can look at the healing place. And they're also, I think, become more willing to kind of share on a deeper level what's really going on for them beyond just simply, let's say, a simple symptom. What might be kind of deeper in there for them, which I think is really important, which has really had to do with kind of my arc as a chiropractor has been, really seeing more and more over time just how little of what's going on for people really is just a purely physical issue. And I've always said that that's an unfortunate part of the chiropractic education, is that there's really not very much emphasis on that.
Definitely. It seems, and it might have less emphasis because it appears to be very challenging to navigate those waters. But I think we're going to circle back to that definitely later on in our conversation, and maybe how you've done that, because I think it is so crucial to do that. I've heard, a previous guest talk about how, 90% of disease has an emotional component to it. So it's like so crucial that you begin to address that, in my opinion, at this point.
I think that's absolutely critical. And in terms of the overall healing process, absolutely essential. Because otherwise you're going to wind up continuing to be in more of a curing situation, which is trying to relieve symptom, which I don't think is an effective way to work with people.
Definitely. Dr. Jan, I also wanted to ask, about Dr. Flynn's practice. Was it simply just her communication with you that kind of blew you away, or was it just the entire experience that you had with her in her office?
It was the whole experience. I mean, she was an incredible adjuster. Her level of communication was remarkable. And like I said, the main thing was just sort of the level of service, and just who she was and what she represented in terms of just purely being within the chiropractic principle.
Okay. I love it. And then Dr. Jan, you had, an amazing background and, in network spinal analysis. And we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast. We've had a few different guests who practice NSA, but I'd love to hear, your journey into NSA. And we'll start there. There's so many levels that I want to go there with you, but let's start there.
So when I was in chiropractic school, I went to NYCC when New York Chiropractic was out on Long Island. And what I decided pretty early on in the game was that I was going to explore whatever was available in chiropractic and try and learn as much as I could while I was in school, and see what felt like the best fit for me. And I wanted to base that on two things. Number one, I wanted to base it on what had the most profound effect on me in terms of my own healing. And the other was, what was the person who was developing that work, using that work for themselves for. So I went to, seminars all over the map. Motion palpation, applied biomechanical engineering, SOT, AK, and Donald was just kind of starting to be doing his seminars, what was called network chiropractic at the time, and I attended one of those pretty early in my chiropractic career. And then also got to watch Donnie in practice, because at the time he was practicing. He had a practice in Brooklyn, which, interestingly enough, he had purchased from the first chiropractor I had seen when I was a teenager. Donnie bought his office. So I kind of brought that piece of the story back to the puzzle. But what fascinated me about network was, number one, Donald was doing something that I didn't think anybody else in chiropractic was doing, which was he was starting from the assumption that all techniques are right, as opposed to all techniques are wrong except for mine. And that was very powerful to me, where he was saying, I think over the years, all these chiropractic techniques have proved their worth. And the fact of the matter is they don't all work all the time. And so let's try and get a sense of a hierarchy of when it might be most effective to use each of the different techniques over time.
I really like that. I just want to reflect a little bit on that. I think that's such a huge foundation to start from. It's just, especially being in my position, I've got to talk with people with so many different backgrounds and way that they apply the art of chiropractic, like having that fundamental acknowledgement that, they all work and maybe there's, times for ones and times for others, and being able to have that balance, I think is really impactful for young students and young docs, just to have that understanding so you don't kind of fall into this is the only way to do it.
Right. And so to me, that was very powerful. So that was number one. Number two was that there was a very strong analysis portion to the work, which I found very attractive as somebody who was a really good student. And sometimes I was very frustrated in what I saw in chiropractic, in the sense that there were a lot of things that I was learning that didn't seem to have enough of an analytic component behind it. The third thing was that one thing that Donald was doing even from the beginning, and when I first started studying network, there were no waves. So that, somatopsychic or network wave that is talked about, and people has become so controversial in the profession to some extent. Mm-hmm. That actually wasn't even a part of the work at the time. That came a couple of years later. But what was exciting to me was that Donald was talking about, even at that time, kind of the whole quantum healing. So the work of Candace Pert, the work of Deepak Chopra, the work of quantum physics in general, where you could really kind of understand the cutting edge of science and be able to apply it chiropractically. Because kind of late 19th century ideas were wonderful in the late 19th century, but science has evolved. And the thing that was exciting to me was here was somebody who was choosing to bring the most modern concepts of science to chiropractic and show how chiropractic was in fact on the cutting edge of science, that things that science was just beginning to understand were things that chiropractic had been dealing with since the beginning, and that medicine really was not. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the chiropractic principle really did apply more than ever when you took into it a late 20th century cutting edge science perspective. And so all those things were incredibly exciting to me. Yeah.
I was just saying something that, you mentioned the last time we chatted, there'll be, whether it's a service trip or something, and there'd be a doc performing, NSA or BGI or one of these approaches. Even docs who don't practice that way will want to receive that care. And I have experienced that before, being on mission trips where like one or two maybe are having that type of approach and others really wanting to receive that. So there is something to be said about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. That has seemingly always been the case as long as I've been in chiropractic, that oftentimes the network doctors are the chiropractors, which I think speaks, to the power of what people are doing. Obviously, there's a wide variety. And I would not at all take the stance that the work that I do is better than anybody else, because I've seen miracles with lots of different types of technical work within chiropractic, and have friends who do very, very different work than me, and they do extraordinary work.
Definitely.
That to me is the wonder of chiropractic, as long as we're holding to the principle, and as long as we're understanding that chiropractic is in fact separate and distinct and is not this little subspecialty of medicine.
Exactly. And kind of what we were talking about in the pre-chat is, being able to be exposed to a conversation like this, and maybe checking out a seminar, and just, dipping your toes into something that's just maybe way outside of your comfort zone. Because I know there's some of our guests who probably haven't had much experience with NSA or BGI, and it seems pretty foreign to them, but would you say just the best way is to, for one, maybe get that care done to you, have they experience or go to a seminar?
I mean, I think if people are interested in learning about something on that end, the best way is to experience it for yourself.
Yeah. And from a master, I would suggest too. It's one thing to have an experience of someone who's just getting into it and then judge it off of that, but someone who's been doing it for a while as well.
Yeah, and obviously all over the country there are remarkable people. The people who are currently teaching NSA are absolutely brilliant, and that has been a development over the last number of years, where even from the time that I was teaching the work, which is now quite a while ago in terms of teaching with Donnie, it's been 20 years, and the people who have come from that, who are now the top teachers in the work and the top practitioners of the work are presenting it at an incredibly high level.
Dr. Jan, did you have any resistance when the somatic wave started getting introduced and some of these different expressions of NSA, or what was your process there? Because I know that's where a lot of people, those reserved. They get reserved about having, seeing that or being around it, or it's just, just maybe the lack of understanding. I would definitely say at times I've fallen into that, not really knowing what's going on with those.
Yeah, and sometimes it's challenging to be able to see something that you may not expect to see on a chiropractic table and actually be seeing it. For me, it was a pretty easy transition. It wasn't necessarily that easy a transition for my body, so it took me a while for my own physiology to kind of catch up with it. But I've always been a student of things spiritual, and so what goes on the table during a network entrainment is not necessarily that much different than things that have happened in rituals throughout time, community services, yoga traditions, a variety of different things. It's not something that has been invented out of whole cloth. It's just that the phenomenon does also take place during network entrainments. And, for me, that created an extraordinary healing experience for me, where I had some remarkable things happen in my own healing. And that's continued to happen over the years in a variety of ways. As someone who's received this work now for over 30 years.
Right. And something that I want to touch on, and I think it would be good for our listeners, is kind of diving into the principles of NSA, but just my experience with it so far, it seems like it is a very evolutionary approach. So it's not necessarily that you're trying to get someone back to a certain state, but rather you're trying to evolve their nervous system, which I find very empowering as a chiropractor. And it's not just NSA or BGI, I think you can have that approach with any application. But it seems like that is at the forefront of NSA and some of these approaches, where it's not about getting someone back to a state or getting them back to neutral or aligned, or it's just like this constant growth, which seems very in line with what we do.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that attracted me, and over the years has continued to. So the original research study that was done on network, which my office was a part of, showed a few things. So first of all, it showed that people were having improvement in about 100 different areas of quality of life. The second thing that it showed, which I think was the most powerful of all, was that there was no plateau. So meaning that the longer that people were under care, the more the improvements continued to happen. And I think that that's a really important piece, because we do want to, the phrase that's used is reorganizational healing. So being able to help the nervous system reorganize at a higher level of integrity, at a higher level of integration, and a higher level of complexity, so that people are literally continuing to heal. So, for example, my corporate name is actually called Beyond Wellness, because I want people to understand that we're really trying to take them to a place that's beyond what they thought wellness was. And that, to me, is an extraordinary place to be able to work with one's patients and also to work with one's own life. Because I think that, like it or not, we tend to be somewhat medically indoctrinated. And the medical approach really is that, once we have passed a few years of life, that the health situation is one that is going to go downhill, that's going to, really devolve over time until death. And my perspective is that I would like people to continue to get healthier and healthier over the course of that time, and that when the eventual end comes, that people are approaching that from still an incredible place of health, as opposed to a place where they welcome it just because they've deteriorated to the point where they don't even want to be alive anymore.
Mm. And Dr. Jan, how about you share a little bit too about maybe just an intro to the contacts, that you have with people when you're serving them? Would you say that it's like you're bringing awareness or acknowledgement, or how do you describe that for people that are really unsure? I know we could probably talk about that for a long time, but just a brief introduction to that.
So the main thing that I talk to people about is the fact that in making a contact on their spine, that I'm looking for a place of ease. That whereas most practitioners are looking for what's wrong with the body, quote unquote, I'm looking for what's right with the body. And what I'm looking to do is to make contact with a place that is already at a place of ease, that will then remind the brain that ease is the natural state of the whole system, so that the brain can go right and it can start to make those changes, so that as soon as possible, people are starting into that process of self-healing, where the brain is starting to be able to make those changes and be able to make those changes more consistently. So one of the things that I talk about is the idea of perceived adapt and recover, where when we first start with somebody, what oftentimes is happening is we're looking for people to recover from trauma that's been stored in the system over the course of time. During that time, it's often the case that when a new stressor comes into the system, that the body will respond in kind of an old reactive way. As soon as possible, we want to get it to a point where when a new stressor affects the system, the brain can look at that and go, oh, I used to always react to this way. That's not the most effective way of doing it. Maybe I'll try this instead. And it becomes more of an adaptation, where the brain is then able to adapt to new stresses coming in and actually make different choices. Ideally, we want to get to the perception level, where now when new information comes in from the outside world, the body is actually just looking at that and going, hey, I used to think that was stressful, but I don't anymore. And so now it doesn't have to become a stressor to the body at all, and the body doesn't have to work with it on that level, but rather work with it as information to use for growth and development, which is now what we're talking about is a healing machine, where the person's system is just working using everything for healing at every moment. And that's an incredibly powerful place to come from.
Extremely powerful. And I would say, very enriching experience for you and the people in your office having conversations like this. I think it very much changes the dialogue. That may be different for people up front when you're talking to them in your office, but I think it can very quickly get away from attention on their symptoms when you start to have these conversations with them, and that fills you up, and I think in a way that will allow you to want to practice forever.
Yes, absolutely. Just this morning, I had a couple come in who were getting and trained together, and they just started talking about how incredibly different the way they're relating to one another is in the 2+ months that they've been under care.
Wow.
And I didn't ask them about it. They just started talking about it. And it was just incredibly perfect, because it is exactly what I'm looking to have happen with people, and exactly what, the type of outcome that I would like to see happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a powerful intention. And because we were just, I was just talking about this with some of my friends. We were on a hike, and I was thinking about, how so many young docs or students coming out of school, they have this message maybe of what chiropractic is and the conversations that they want to have in their office, but then maybe not having the conviction with that, or over time it kind of gets beaten out of them a little bit. And the next thing you know, you're just constantly seeing people with pain, and that's all the conversation is. And you do that for 15, 20 years. I think that has a certain toll on your system. And I want to acknowledge, like, you always want to meet people where they're at, and then most of the time they're going to come into your office with something. But there is definitely a balance of acknowledging that, yet introducing a new way of thinking about maybe their symptoms and their health that will definitely serve them, way better, like what you just explained with, the people that came into your office. But then as a practitioner too, I think, being able to have those conversations in your day-to-day life, every single day, it's just so fulfilling.
It absolutely is. I think the most important thing is for the doctor to change the relationship to the symptom, right? So you can acknowledge the symptom without buying into the symptom. You can be empathetic with what the person is experiencing, because Lord knows we've all been there. We've all had symptoms, whether it was physical symptoms or emotional symptoms or mental symptoms. If we're honest with ourselves, we've been there. And the question is, number one, for me in my life, how do I change my relationship to symptom? And then number two, how do I help my patients change their relationship to symptom? So that the symptom is an alarm bell in the body saying something's going on somewhere that needs attention. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs attention right at that spot. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs direct intervention. It just means something's going on that the body is bringing your awareness to, that needs your awareness to come to it. What's important, and what I try and explain to my patients over time, and actually pretty early in the game, is that symptoms are a late stage thing to show up in the body. That the body will in fact work around things without throwing symptoms as much as possible, trying to look for the answers itself. And it's only when it gets to a point of, hey, I can't deal with this anymore, I really need to sound an alarm here, that it does sound the alarm, so that more awareness will come to that area. So I try and look for myself and also for my patient population to look and have them look at symptoms as more of a gift than anything else, and something that will allow us to then further explore this extraordinary world of healing that's possible.
Definitely. And, it seems like there is definitely an art to that conversation, because I do acknowledge there's times where, even with the people that I'm taking care of, like there gets a point where I want to like project maybe this side of the story, but yet they're at a point where they're not quite ready to hear that. And like you said, we've all been in those symptom places where it's like you just want to get out of this like pain. So it's like, how do you have any kind of little nuggets there that kind of help that process versus making it seem like you're just trying to get their mind off of it and kind of project that on them?
Well, again, I think the most important thing is to get comfortable with that yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that's the starting place. I think it's the place of looking at your own symptoms and going, how much of a curing mentality am I having towards my own healing? And I think that's where it starts. And the more committed to our own healing we can be, the easier it is to have that conversation, because we're really living it. So again, it's the old expression, walk the talk, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're saying one thing, but in your life you're living it totally differently, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. People can see through the falseness of that statement, because they can see on some level that you're not dealing with it yourself.
Wow, that's powerful.
Whereas if they can see that is in fact the way you're living your own life, and that it can extend to a lot of different areas, then they're going to listen. They're going to realize, yeah, this is somebody who's talking from experience. They're talking from their own personal life. They're talking from their own commitment, and then they will buy in.
Yeah, that's a huge, huge insight. That's a great reminder to have, because the more that we are in integrity with what we're saying, it's just very congruent, and people will pick up on that, and there won't be as much resistance because it's true for you. It's not something that you're saying that you don't believe in.
Exactly. And what's interesting, and this had already started by the time I was in chiropractic school, but, clearly has gotten more and more prevalent over the course of the 30 years since I've been in school, which is that chiropractic school has become very medically curing oriented. And there's just no two ways about saying that, and that's the truth at pretty much every school, where because of the socialization process, because of CCE requirements, much of the chiropractic education is now, in fact, a medical education. And that medical education comes along with medical belief systems. And so when I start teaching my page one in the early stages of the page one seminar that I teach, that's one of the first things I look at with people is just how much we have ourselves bought into the medical model, regardless of whether we think we're chiropractors or not. And whether that really works or not, whether that in fact is a true model of the way healing works, which I firmly believe it is not. Right. So as I explained, if I walk out the door and God forbid get hit by a car, don't take me to the chiropractor, get me to the hospital, because that emergency medical situation is exactly what medicine is best at. Put me back together again, and then absolutely get me to the chiropractor as soon as possible to get checked and start the healing process from
Definitely.
there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And we need to remember that for medical people, they've been trained, because of the nature of medical training, to look at everything from a life and death perspective, because that's what they're constantly surrounded with in their education. And so it absolutely makes sense for their perspective to be a constant life and death, as opposed to an idea of healing and growth and moving through life and welcoming situations as being a natural part of life, a natural part of the healing process, a natural part of existence, a natural part of what can make us powerful. Most prominent example of that being pregnancy for a woman, where it's taken out of that being the most remarkable experience that a human being probably can have on the planet, which is bringing forth new life, and turning that into somehow a medical emergency. Mm-hmm. All three of my children were born at home. The process was magical, miraculous, extraordinary, and we expected no less.
Right. And empowering too. I mean, for women today, it's just like this process becomes so fear-based, and what a state to bring somebody into the world. And that is definitely what they, kids and people get hammered with from day one. So it is a very challenging, against the grain battle that, chiropractors are going against within themselves, like you mentioned, and then, with the people that they serve.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is that people know, they know it when they hear truth. Mm-hmm. And there's more and more in the world that, if you look for it, that supports more of a healing mentality. That's happening in food, that's happening in exercise, that's happening in things like meditation. It's happening in many, many different areas. The scary thing has been watching chiropractic move in the opposite direction of that and move more towards, oh no, all we're good for is pain, and God forbid we should see children. And somehow that's, to me, that's insanity, especially with the things that I've seen with children. Right. And the things that I've seen with animals, because one of the things that I've always said is the test of your technique is, how does it work on animals and children? Because animals and children have no intellectual attachment. It's either going to work or it's not going to work.
I like that. That's a good thing to keep in mind. Dr. Jan, I think that's a good segue, right into talking a little bit about page 1 and page 2. You've been, doing this seminar for a while, but then you took a long break, and now you're back into it this last year. You've kind of touched on it already, but let's jump into the why of page 1 and what you're really trying to create for people that come to your seminar.
So I actually had a revelation when I was teaching, or just going to teach page 2 in Australia in March, and I was teaching it for the first time, and I was kind of looking at the whole perspective of what is it that I'm trying to do with these seminars, and I realized that within NSA, there has been this shift from what is called restorative healing, where we're trying, as I think you said earlier, trying to bring people back to a particular state where they were before an accident or before an illness or whatever, trying to restore them. And I look at that as kind of trying to return something to the past. So within network, there's this whole idea of reorganizational healing, moving someone towards a future where the nervous system is operating at a much higher level of integrity and integration. And that is future. And what I realized the purpose of page 1 and page 2, I call it reestablishing the practitioner in the present moment. So being able to allow people to return to a moment where they are recognizing nothing but this present moment with their patient and with themselves. And that's what the 2 seminars are really are meant to do. So the way I describe the first seminar is really sweeping the floors in the manner of the training of a classical sushi chef in Japan, where for the first 2 years, all they did was sweep the floor of the restaurant until they did that with an absolute excellence every time. And then over the course of years, move on to eventually cutting fish. And what I find is that in our profession, people are always wanting to cut fish when they really should be sweeping floors. And so what the weekend is about is being able to return to this pure state of sweeping floors, and going back to very, very basics of chiropractic, but with a much deeper understanding. So, for example, we look at palpation, and we spend a lot of time with palpation over the course of the 2 seminars, but we look at it from a much deeper perspective. So we look at every possible aspect of palpation and how we can be most effective with our palpation, and how we can use palpation as a learning tool for not only our own enlightenment, but for the patient for us to understand what has been going on in that patient's life from the beginning until now. And we can pick those things up if we are cognizant of how to do that. We also work on a variety of internal exercises where we kind of learn more about how our own nervous systems work and how we can be more effective in our own lives and our own practices. We learn to kind of recognize things that are standing in our way in terms of giving and receiving, in terms of what causes us to become distracted as opposed to completely focused. We look at how we present ourselves around the table. So there's a lot of different aspects, but all of it comes back down to this idea of reestablishing the practitioner in the present moment.
Dr. Jan, you kind of gave that analogy of sweeping floors and chopping fish. How do you think that relates with chiropractic? Would you say like chopping fish is, docs just really being pulled towards the actual physical impulse versus everything else that comes before that? Or how would you break those two up?
Well, I think that like for instance, within NSA, There are some very simple ideas in NSA, and then there are things that are much more complex. And people are tending to want to do the really complex stuff before they've really mastered the really simple stuff. And I think that that's true in chiropractic in general. So, like take a work like AK or SOT. There are very, very simple principles there. But until you've really mastered those things, it would behoove you to work harder at mastering those before going on to the more complex aspects of it.
Right. And we mentioned, in the pre-chat that you have a lot of docs, especially outside of the U.S., that are coming to your seminars. So how does that, translate for them, going back to the basics in practice while still seeing, their people at, depending on whatever volume they are? How can they reintegrate that?
So the response that I've gotten is that people have loved that opportunity. And that they find that then when they go back to practice, they are freed up in a way that enables them to have much greater focus, much greater ease, much more energy at the end of the day. Their patients are saying incredible things to them about what they're experiencing based on kind of their new way of being. Because ultimately that relationship with the patient is limited by how present we are as practitioners.
Awesome. And Dr. Jan, is there, a couple exercises or one or two, exercises that docs who maybe can't get to your seminar coming up in August that they could start to implement in their practice after hearing some of this and want to, try something that can maybe begin them on this path if they haven't had it already?
Well, the thing that I stress is this idea that, we've been lied to with the expression practice makes perfect, right? Because practice doesn't make perfect unless it's conscious practice. And then conscious practice makes excellence. Because what I like to say about the difference between excellence and perfect is perfect. If we're looking to do something perfectly, we will usually always work within our comfort zone until we can do it absolutely right every time. And that's perfect, but it doesn't allow us to stretch beyond what we're comfortable with. And so whatever you're going to do, and this is, when we look at the study of what's called now peak science, where people look at peak performers in different ways, they realize that the way performers become peak performers is by constantly doing things that are just a little bit out of their comfort zone. So for people who are already in practice, one of the things would be to work a little more efficiently, like try and see 2 more people per hour than you're seeing now. One of the things that I talk to with the students and the doctors alike is that I believe that to really become a master of palpation, that it's a great idea to make sure that we are practicing palpation 30 minutes a day. And that doesn't necessarily mean practicing palpating spines. You can practice palpating any kind of texture, but the focus needs to be on that present moment and totally focusing on that, and then being aware of allowing the monkey mind, the chattering mind, to get quieter by the focus that we're placing on the activity.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, kind of referring back to what you said of when you guys do go over palpation in your seminars, it's just like there's so many layers, especially when you're trying to get into the emotional patterns or just different experiences that people have had. What people think is possible with palpation, I think, is very limited until you've had some of this training that will allow you to see what's possible when you put your hands on someone and what you can really begin to pick up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always one of the revelatory aspects of the seminar, is when people are all of a sudden realizing, oh my God, I'm picking that up. And then when we start looking at things like inter-rater reliability within the seminar, where I'll ask a series of questions and have the group answer in particular ways and see how much agreement there is amongst people as to exactly what they're finding. And people are able to really come into their own mastery by doing that, by bringing more awareness to the topic at hand.
I find this so fascinating, Dr. Jan, that you're how old are you now? 60?
I'm 65.
65 and still so passionate, about the work that you're doing, and you've sustained yourself, for this long. And it's not seen that often. I've had a limited exposure, I would say, to everyone in chiropractic, but it's rare to see, someone like yourself still doing it this long and sustaining it and having congruency in all these different areas of your life. But at this moment, what are you really looking forward to in the future for the profession, and just what's possible going forward?
What I would love to see in the profession is a full commitment to healing as opposed to curing. That chiropractic starts to once again kind of take a leading position and an insistent position of itself as, number one, a separate and distinct profession, where we're not trying to utilize all the aspects of physical therapy and all the aspects of medicine and try and come in the back door of medicine the way, unfortunately, osteopathy has. Because osteopathy was an incredible profession in and of itself. And in fact, some of the best research ever done on the nervous system was done with the osteopathic profession, whether in the States or in Russia or all over the place. And now that's, just another way into medicine. Unfortunately, chiropractic has been doing the same thing, and I find it sad, because there's no doubt in my mind that chiropractic and what it represents and the principles of chiropractic are the closest to what cutting-edge scientists have been finding to be true about the human body, and closest to that than any of the other professions. So I'm hopeful that people will begin to wake up and see that, start to recognize that, honor the people that have just been incredibly vilified for taking that stance over the course of time, who've really been challenged on many different levels in many different areas of our profession, and that we start to pay homage to those people and really respect the principle that they've held and the work that they've done over time.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And I honestly do believe that, if students and even docs, who weren't exposed to, some of the messages that, have been on this podcast and like you said, so many of the greats, they would have, looked at a different path. I think so much of it is just not being exposed to the greatness that we do have and feeling that they need to go and do different things, or like you said, come in the back door through medicine. Like, I think when you hear, like you said, when you hear a truth, like it's not, you can't really unhear it. And I just think that so many, docs and students, unfortunately, don't get to be exposed to these different truths within the chiropractic profession that is allowed it to stand, or what, it was founded on in so many ways.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's been disappearing more and more from the education system. Mm-hmm. And so people have needed to find it themselves. That was my experience when I was a student. We went out of our way to make sure that we were finding those roads. So we would travel down to Georgia to hear Dr. Sid when he was alive, and we would go hear Dr. Joe Felicia and Dr. Guy Rietman with Renaissance, and spend time with Donnie and spend time with any principled chiropractor we could find, and got a hold of green books and just read what these things were and worked through those thousands of pages of really, really challenging syntax from DD and BJ and tried to cull that down and really understand what the principles were really about. One of the people that I think everyone should be paying attention to right now is Simon Senzon, who is just a genius in terms of bringing not only chiropractic principles to the forefront, but the entire art, philosophy, history, science of chiropractic through his TIC, the work that he's doing, and the amount of information that he's sharing with the chiropractic public and with the profession is just remarkable stuff.
How do you spell his last name?
Senzon. He practices in Asheville, North Carolina. And he has a subscription, which is a monthly or yearly or lifetime subscription, to be able to gain access to basically all of the great historical documents within chiropractic that he's been doing edits of. He's been re-releasing things. He's been releasing things that have never been released, whether it's videos, audios, books, just all kinds of stuff. And Simon is one of the leaders in restoring the profession to its greatness in that way.
Right. Yeah, I'll try and find like a link to that and have that in the episode notes. But, going back, to your point about how so many of the schools are losing that, I can only speak to my experience at Life West, and though I fully acknowledge, where there's a lot of classes that are being, forced into a more medical approach based off the CCE and different requirements and national boards, and I acknowledge that. But at the same time, like I did have, some great professors who I think coming back to the school to teach and acknowledging that part of it, but yet, doing their part to try and come back and bring in that other side of all this stuff that we've been talking about. So at least the students have more of an opportunity to get, exposed to, the truths of chiropractic and different things like that. So I hope that, grows, in a lot of aspect. I don't know what it looks like on other chiropractic colleges, but
yeah, I think it's true of a few schools, and that's, part of what's oftentimes been great about chiropractic has been people coming back from the field to share the wisdom with students. Do you guys still get Bruce Lipton over there?
Yes, to my knowledge, every summer he does an elective, which is, I think it's like 4 or 5 weeks on a Wednesday night, where he just goes off for about 4 hours and has everybody's eyes just like extremely open and just jaw dropped the entire time. So I got to experience that like my first or second quarter, which was pretty powerful.
Yeah, and Bruce obviously is not a chiropractor, and yet everything he teaches completely fits in with the chiropractic principle at its best. And he, again, is one of those leading edge scientists doing the real work as opposed to pretending that we know everything there is to know about the human body.
Definitely. All right, Dr. Jan, I just have a couple quick fire questions that I want to ask you. Let's go with, at this point in your career, how do you continue to kind of keep an open mind and a beginner's mind, as it seems very challenging to do for a lot of people as they get farther and farther along in their career?
Usually the world has a way of doing that for me. So when I see that there's a drop-off in my practice, I know that I'm not in that space. When I get critical comments from my patients who are, because they're in the process of healing and committed to it, they're happy to let me know if I'm not holding up my end of the bargain. So that's the way, I stay with it. I have a consistent meditation practice. I also belong to a men's team where we hold one another accountable to things we want to be accomplishing in our lives. And I think it's really important for people to have a support system of some kind in their lives where people are holding one another accountable. When I was in school, we had a core group of 5 or 6 of us that studied together basically from the start of school till the end. and we worked each other to the point of becoming as excellent as we could within that situation. And at the time, this was when every single state had its own state board. And I'm happy to say that in our group, not a single person ever failed a state board.
Nice. That's awesome.
And so finding support is essential for everybody, and particularly for students, making sure you're surrounding yourself with people who will support your vision of who you want to be. And that, by the way, that's another thing that I teach in page 1 is what I call the 10 rules for success, either in school or in the profession, which are things that have actually been handed down now for 25 years at certain places.
Awesome. And, something that we didn't get to talk about too much was the fact that you took a lot of time off from teaching because you're missing some crucial events with your children. So, I mean, that just shows me like how much you value, your family and relationships. And it was important for you to find that balance where a lot of, chiropractors and people in general, they lose. So I'd love maybe for you to share how you went about doing that, and maybe how docs can just start off with a very solid foundation so that they don't have, those big moments where they're just way out of balance, which can happen really easily.
Well, yes, they happen very easily. And the fact of the matter was that, again, it was the universe kind of hitting me over the head. There was a time in my life where basically I was practicing 4 days a week and then out on the road 3 days a week, almost every week. This was when we were in the early days of the transformational gates, where there were 10 of them a year, plus teaching seminars. And I was doing almost all of them in addition to being in practice. And then what happened was that I was over in Paris teaching one of the earliest European seminars and got a fax, if you remember what faxes were, got a fax from home saying, "Oh, your daughter took her first steps today." And I realized that, again, I'm in the wrong place here. And so I decided to take the very extreme step of pretty much just stopping being on the road entirely, because I realized it was more important for me to really be around my kids especially in their early stages. So every once in a while, I would go out and teach what was then page 1. But even stopped doing that after a pretty short period of time because it was just more fun to be home. And now I'm at a point where my kids are grown up. So I have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and one who is just about to turn 17. And it's easier to go on the road from time to time. And people really requested me to come and do it, which was, again, very gratifying, very humbling. Mm-hmm. So back doing it.
Yeah, I totally derailed us from the quickfire round, but I think that was important, because we've talked about the balance, and a lot of people don't like the word balance, and they say there's no such thing. But whatever you want to call it, it's just like having that constant check-in, with your values is really important, and some type of process or system on a regular basis to do that, or have people that hold you accountable to that, I think is really, really important. Because like you said, going back to when we're serving people, that's another thing that people can see right through is potentially that out of balance state, or you're not living in integrity with your values. And whether they pick it up consciously or subconsciously, I think there is definitely a disconnect when you're saying one thing and yet you're not living it yourself. So I just wanted to touch on that point. But Dr. Jan, how about your favorite books or resources that you'd love to share with young docs or students listening?
Okay, let's see. So, favorite books. Favorite chiropractic book is the very small D.D. Palmer yellow cover book called The Chiropractor, which has my favorite essay in it, which is called The Moral and Religious Duty of a Chiropractor, in which he talks about what he thinks the real idea behind chiropractic is, which I won't give away. Go pick up a copy of the book. You can find it. The Bigness of the Fellow Within is probably my favorite BJ book. And the Stevenson chiropractic textbook is pretty essential. Some others within the scientific realm, the Holographic Universe, I think is a really important book. Dune, the great science fiction classic by Frank Herbert, is an extraordinary book that I think everyone should read. And probably the most influential book of the last couple of years for me is actually Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, Born to Run. In that, he basically writes a 650-page Bruce Springsteen song, where you get to not only see the absolute depths of a human being, but you get to see what it really takes to be excellent at anything in life, by the just insane amount of work that he puts into his craft, into his heart, and his commitment to just being the absolute best all the time. I think it's actually the most powerful self-awareness book that I've ever read.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm wanting to go pick that up now that hopefully I have a little bit of time this summer to read a 600-page book. But awesome. So, Dr. Jan, I just want to say, thank you so much for taking this time. I don't think you cut out one time. Our listeners are going to get every single second recorded with this conversation.
Oh, we did better than last year then.
Yes. So really just enjoy the work that you're doing, and just so grateful that you're continuing to give back at this point for you. And, I really want to get to your seminar. I'm so drawn. And even though I'm going to be technically a doc, I think, I'll have so much to learn, even though, I felt like I've learned so much, but I feel like I'm still scratching the surface. So I just really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. But I'd love for you to go ahead.
The thing that's been delightful has been seeing how even though the seminar was originally developed for beginning chiropractic students, seeing just how much doctors of all levels of experience have gotten out of these programs has been, to me, the most wonderful thing. For those who don't know, I'm actually going to be coming out to the Bay Area and teaching page 1 and page 2 August 4th and 5th. If anybody in Europe is getting this, I'm actually going to be teaching page 1 and page 2 in Paris just in a few weeks on June 30th and July 1st. And there is actually a Facebook page which is a little bit longer than we might like, but it's you find it under Dr. Jan Kirschner, so Dr. then Jan Jan Kirschner Kirschner, page 1 and page 2. So it's a long mouthful, but you can find it, and you can actually link to registrations right through that if you're interested in coming.
Perfect. So I'll have definitely that on our show notes and our website, and that's the best place for our listeners to register there. And then what about just connecting with you, Dr. Jan?
So you can find me on Facebook, Jan Kirschner, Kirschner, and that's probably the best way. You can ask for a friend request or shoot me a messenger message, and I'm happy to answer from folks.
Sounds good. And Dr. Jan, we've covered a ton, but is there any final words for our audience that you have, or a request for them?
Just keep the healing process going. Keep your own healing process going, and understand that you're on the side of what's actually real.
All right. Awesome, Dr. Jan. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you, Ray, and congratulations on your impending graduation.
Yes.
One more great doc into the world. We need it.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
All right, TAC listeners, if you enjoy this one, head over to iTunes or Stitcher so you can subscribe to the podcast and get an automatic download of our newest episode each and every week. While you're at it, we love a review, a comment, a rating, anything that will allow us to reach more docs and more students and continue to raise the bar in chiropractic performance training. If you haven't yet checked out the artfulchiropractor.com, you can do that for show notes for this episode and previous ones, along with any of the resources that our docs are dropping. And if you haven't yet checked out the Kairos Training Culture Community Facebook page, you have to get there, send a request with a message of who you are and why you want to be a part of the group, because there are so many amazing golden nuggets that are being dropped every single day that are elevating the chiropractic performance game. So with that, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week as always, and until next time, peace.